All right, well, today we're going to talk about the proposed 2019 City of Palo Alto budget. Exciting stuff. Joining us is City Councilwoman Lydia, who is a member of the Finance Committee and who just went through reviewing the proposal and making some decisions on that. Lydia, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. My very first session as council member on the Finance Committee, so it's all brand new to me.
Well, there are a lot of documents to go through, which looks intimidating to the layperson. Gennady, can you give us kind of an overview real quick on what they were talking about, and then we can dive into some of the issues?
Yeah, I mean, the Finance Committee is probably like City Hall's most arduous book club. This is what they've been reading on Wednesday, these two big books, the operating and the capital budgets. It was a little different this year. Usually the whole process takes about more than a month, but they kind of powered through it in 2 marathon sessions last week on May 15th and 16th.
During the day instead of...
During the day from 9 a.m. to 4-ish.
4-ish.
And then they completed it this past Wednesday when they issued recommendations for the full council to adopt next month. And I guess I'm sure Councilwoman Koo could tell you a lot more because she studied these books. But basically, the big picture action that they took was the Finance Committee agreed that the $214 million general fund budget that's proposed by Jim Keane is too large because of the city's pension problems, and then they need to cut about $8 million, including $4 million in the coming fiscal year. So you guys gave Jim Keane an assignment in the next few months to come up with that. And I think this might be a good place to kind of start. I was hoping maybe Councilwoman Koo could tell us a little bit about that decision, the $4 million negative credit that you'll be essentially starting the next fiscal year with, and why you felt it was important to make those cuts.
I think, so that was a motion that was presented by Vice Mayor Kilseth. Mm-hmm. And it was at $5 million. Mm-hmm. And so it was just a start. For me, the reason I voted for it was because I thought it was just a start, a place for staff to guide them towards seeing where they can cut and make their departments throughout more efficient. Mm-hmm. But it was a beginning point just for them to explore. And what they came back with at this point is just to go through and see if we can reduce $4 million. And instead of approving a $214 million budget, it'll be $210. So from there, it gives them some room for them to see where it is that they can cut and make it more efficient. It's still something that they have to come back with and before full council, as well as sometime back to the Finance Committee before we go on break.
And the process is quite unusual in that usually the Finance Committee kind of makes the cuts over the budget process and says, adopt this. Mm-hmm. Here they adopted a smaller budget that's in here and said, come back and make up the difference. What are some of the areas where you think the difference could be made up? Like, I know Jim kind of outlined some of them, but... some areas that you think should be looked at?
I think some of our programs can be streamlined a little bit better and made more efficient to work out. I mean, we have for me, I feel like the business registry is just languishing over there. Mm-hmm. If they kind of reviewed it a little bit more, perhaps, they can see where is it that we're spending too much time and money on, where it's not getting the full results. Another thing is perhaps parking, the RPPs, Another thing is our contractors really doing the highest quality work over there in terms of gathering data and making sure that we have enforcement as well. Another place is, how can we make the police department more efficient in watching out for our garages and so forth? And one of the recommendations, and I forget who actually recommended that, was to put cameras in our garages rather than having security or our police officers drive through, So there are many different programs in the city that I think might be reviewed in the city manager's department or in utilities or in other departments that perhaps they can look at working it more efficiently. And because, this is a function under the city manager or our CAOs, it's best for them to look at it and come back to us. in the business I am in, we always have deadline for things, you know.
Oh, me too.
So, yes, you too.
Sounds familiar.
So it would be nice for us to have a deadline, you know, which sometimes is difficult on government, but it would be nice to know when to expect the responses back on those too.
And it sounds like you guys determined that staff will come back a little bit after the council break, like in the first quarter.
Right.
So it's not too much of a kicking the can down the road. It sounds like August, September timeframe,
Yes,
you're expected to start getting some of these answers.
after break.
So then the cuts that would be proposed, they would be implemented effective immediately then? I mean, there's just kind of $4 million that needs to be made up, and the longer you wait
Right,
to make that
right,
decision, then.
Of course, this is going to go before council on June 18th, you know, before we go on council break for the full council to approve. But from the finance committee, yes, we're recommending that.
Yeah.
Recommending that.
Yeah,
Right.
if they don't end up cutting basically $4 million, then I think the chief financial officer, Lalo Perez, said they're basically run out of money, like on around May, because if you approve a
Right.
if you approve a $214
came up
million
short.
budget with a $4 million negative credit, it's like, so some things will have to be done immediately, basically, or at least in the next few months.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask about a few specific things that the budget does. I mean, in many ways, it's been described as a status quo budget, in that most things are going to be as is. But there's a few changes, and a few changes that were almost made. And just to avoid bearing the lead any further, there was a lot of talk about city auditor. There was a motion made and adopted on May 15th to eliminate 5 out of 6 positions. And this week, you guys reversed, you guys changed course. And you were actually the first committee member who said, like immediately beginning of the meeting, I think this wasn't wise. I think we should reconsider it. And the committee ultimately agreed to make decisions later. Can you talk a little about why the initial vote took place last week and what prompted you to reverse course on that?
At the beginning, so one, it was actually quite a surprise, you know, with the proposal to eliminate, to take out all the positions in the auditor's office.
Except the city auditor herself. So it would be 5 out of 6.
Yeah,
right?
Because that had not been proposed by
No,
Jim Keane
no.
in his budget.
No. And so it was actually very surprising for me. I can only imagine the auditor, you know, being there. But then at the initial listening to all the questions, and also because we had initially spoken about the 5 million cut, and then thinking about it, I thought maybe that might help in terms of helping towards the cuts in our contribution to it. And then also hearing reassurance that our audits would not be of less quality coming from consultants.
Which is what she suggested, I think, last week, but not this week. So
Yeah,
that's-
and you know, in her defense, she really has not gone out and looked at it either. So it might be something that she wasn't quite aware. And then afterwards, speaking to a lot of community members and past council members as well, they actually said that this was something in the charter that that Palo Alto residents had wanted. And they put it into a charter in 1983. And it's a way, and to be honest, I often looked at the auditor's office as a check and balance for government, especially our government. And it's a way for reassurance to our residents that, you know, our city government is being transparent and accountable. And also knowing fully in the past 2 years that our citizens actually go to Harriet, who has a very open door, and she actually responds pretty promptly to our residents in terms of some of the inquiries that they come in to her with. So she does respond to the residents, and, you know, there has been, for example, the code enforcement audit that she's working on. And so, you know, it's been delayed a little bit, you know, and I hope that this doesn't distract from it actually finalizing. But there has been progress in her department where there is reassurance to our community that something is being done.
There was a concern brought up during the meeting by Chair Scharf that the office isn't as productive as it should be. I'm curious whether you share those concerns, whether your experience is about how the office is working, whether you're satisfied.
I am satisfied. I only know, so it was new to me when Councilmember Scharf mentioned that Harriet had indicated that they were going to do 10 audits. I only thought they were going to do 6. So anything that and above was very good for me. But also, I also know that they've been working on implementing or auditing the ERP. Don't ask me about the acronym because I don't remember.
Enterprise Resource Planning.
It's a new program, a software program that they're trying to implement throughout the city to all departments.
It's basically all the payroll stuff, all the employee data.
It's a pretty big job, and ensuring good data goes in and no more unuseful data goes in. So it's a big job. And I feel like, they are doing their part and at the same time doing what the community is asking of them to a certain degree. And then, of course, we have that big National Citizens Survey that she does every year that gives us benchmarks or indications of how well the city is performing according to the residents. That's a big one, too. So I felt that she was doing her job and the department was. Now, what is internal in her department, I'm not so aware about. So, that's
It's kind of a wall for city council members when it comes
Exactly.
to knowing what's going on in specific departments.
Right.
Other than talking to the head of the department.
Right. And so I can't say what is happening back behind there in her department that might not be, that maybe other council members know about that I don't.
So this week, it seemed like Richardson had gone out and done some research, some communications with other agencies that have, hired consulting auditors. And it seemed like her opinion was really pretty strong against. I don't know there were just reservations about going the consulting route, or if your perception was that it was stronger, just as far as like trying to keep the staff.
I thought that she actually was given an opportunity this time in order to go and do some research about, questions that were raised, and not just to say your productivity is not up to par, so we're going to cut it. She came back with information to help us make a decision how to move forward, and I value that. You can't just say, off you go. I would have liked to see more information so that give her more time. So we did allow for that now, which is something.
You voted against that, though, right? Because there was a separate motion about coming back with the auditor.
I did, because I wanted her to take, there's one thing to tell her to do something, but to go back, to not give her anything to hold on to take back to her employees, just seemed to be footless endeavor for her to take back, and say, so you do have I do have some confidence that you do keep your job. So, how do we move forward now? At least give her some tool or some help in how she's going to take this back to her staff members.
So does that mean you would have preferred a motion that says keep city auditor's office intact, but come up with ideas for increasing productivity, as opposed to kind of explore alternative staffing models, things like that?
Right. For another year, if you're going to, if you want to look at alternatives, at least give them the time to do that, to look at alternatives and to see if that department can work cohesively. If they're not, and come up with some productivity to show us that indeed they're working towards making it more efficient and productive.
Okay. Can I jump for a second about another section of 7th floor in City Hall, City Manager's office? You guys have had Gil Friend here for a few years, Chief Sustainability Officer, and I think as part of this budget, his little office, which is like a couple of people, is going to be eliminated, subsumed in Jim Keen's broader office. I think his position is going to be gone early this year. So what was the thinking behind kind of eliminating the Chief Sustainability Officer position and subsuming its work into the broader organization?
Mr. Friend was going to be leaving. He was retiring, I think.
Okay.
I don't remember which month but I remember seeing a letter coming in and saying that he's going to be retiring from that position. So since we have, for me, I just thought since we have budget cuts anyways, and most of the departments are contributing their reports in terms of their sustainability within their departments towards, they have their own kind of ways of coming up with the reports, which they add on to Mr. Friend's report, which he provides to the council. We just figured, that might be a way to kind of help cut costs with his department and just leave it subsumed in the city manager.
So the position is no longer necessary, the chief sustainability officer. It's like the number one cheerleader for green initiatives kind of thing.
Right.
I mean, leaving is one thing because, people leave all the time and they're
Well,
replaced, there's higher.
the master plan has been approved, so.
Okay.
you
Well,
assume the
there's
work's gonna
that, and
be
then also, I think my big thought was, since we're doing budget cuts, let's kind of hold off on doing anything with that position until we see something different come about with our budgets.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the vice mayor's big issues for a long time now has been the pension liability looming over the city and all cities in California.
I do recall him mentioning that every meeting this year. Anyway, sorry.
So he was looking at $8 million and wanting at least $4 million to be cut. Do you share his sense of burden over the pension liability? Do you want more to be cut than $4 million from the budget? Or what's your kind of overall philosophy in handling that unfunded liability?
I figured, since we have the vice mayor who's so
Don't know.
well versed in pension, I let him educate us on that side of it. So I don't really deal too much into it. I do have to say that I am concerned about certain, while I do see our budget, our pension looming in the years to come, and we do have to find a way to solve it. I am very concerned about all the positions that are going down in our safety department, in our public safety department. I know that there is difficulty in hiring over there, and we're really trying to be competitive with other cities.
Are you talking about police and fire, or just police?
Police and fire, yeah. So I am concerned about where our growth, daytime population has been going up substantially, yet our public safety departments have been kind of being reduced. And it seems that some of the biggest cuts come from there. Understandably, they do have some of the bigger pensions, but we're going to have to find ways on how to complement so that the pension doesn't become top priority and then continue cutting down on the public safety departments.
Yeah.
Since you did mention public safety, I thought it was a good transition back to the budget to ask about the fire department, because I feel like that's the one department in the budget that's losing 11 positions. It's the bulk of the 16 positions all around come from the fire department. And that's not really new. That's already been implemented as part of the agreement in January. And I know you've been heavily involved in emergency response for years before you came to the council. I just was hoping to get your thoughts about this new cross-staffing model that enabled these reductions, whether you think it's working, whether you have any concerns about it, any broad thoughts on the 11 positions that are being eliminated in the fire department.
Well, I have full confidence in our police, in our fire chief. So he seems to be very up to date on what is happening all across, here regionally. But he also seems to be very on top of how our community is transitioning. So, so I know that I'm very confident about what he's doing. Also addressing, he's also mentioned that our population here in Palo Alto has been changing. So a lot of it is the aging population. So in terms of ambulances, that's the paramedics and the EMTs are where we're going with. So, the cross model, it seems like a efficient way to do it. But I think down the line, we might want to explore that a little bit more just to kind of get further understanding about it, and whether I want to give it the chance to work and see how it comes out before we say that's not the right way. Because I think that, that's in his hands, and he would know what the model to go with.
You haven't heard anything negative about it to date, right? Because I think January is when it began to be implemented. And cross-staffing is when firefighters use separate vehicles, can transition from one to the other, basically. So you won't need a different set of people in each of them, if anybody doesn't know. But you haven't heard any negative feedback or any concerns?
No, and I think it's too early for us to kind of, I haven't heard anything, but I think it's too early. I think, it needs to kind of go through a few more cycles, or quarters or a year before we kind of look at that and see whether it worked, and for him to kind of give us reports also. But from the community, no, I haven't.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
So one of the ideas that Keene, I think, brought, according to your reporting, for $4 million in cuts is the idea of civilianizing medics and paramedics. So the model that other cities and jurisdictions have, where
Right.
the ambulances are.
And I think that was what I was meaning to say, let's take a little bit time to see if we can transition to that. But I would want to see the chief come back and let us know how he feels about that first, too.
So not an immediate switch over maybe to the civilianizing, the privatizing, but to see how it's going right now?
Right.
Yeah, okay. Are there any other thoughts that you had on the budget or anything happening in the city that you want to mention before we wrap up today?
I do, actually. I would really like to see, I think that we have certain revenue-generating tax measures that's going out in order to cover our infrastructure plans from the 2014. I would really like the city to kind of explore more than just a TOT. I feel like we've zeroed in on the hotel folks and kind of say, it's coming from there. I would like to see the city kind of really explore doing, whether it's a business license tax or a head count tax, employee head count tax, or gross receipts. I think I put one of these motions that I had at one of the meetings, I forget what it was, or which one it was, but I did put a motion forth to have at least staff explore all these revenue generating measures so that we can at least poll it, if nothing. Right now we're very specific to as what we're polling. And I think that does a disservice to other means of having revenue generated. San Francisco is kind of moving forward, really looking forward to generating revenue under Supervisor Peshkin. He's even coming up with a fee, proposing a fee for Ubers and Lyfts and all the share rides, And I think that, we should kind of be broad and look at that, especially in the coming years if we're going to really try to if we're really trying to come up with budget proposals that is not going to have more deeper cuts. And I think as a functioning city, we need to look at that. Some of the programs also that I think that we should be looking at, for example, is parking in lieu fees. We're always having difficulty with parking, right? And over here in one of the reports, it says the cost per additional space in the proposed downtown garage is $105,000. 105,853.
Wow. So really almost 106.
Yeah. But the thing is, what we're actually, the reports that we get back is actually coming to us at 63,000, a little bit over 63,000. So we're there's a discrepancy of 40,000 that's left on the table.
So you think the city should charge developers to provide more in fees for projects in which they don't provide the parking that is needed?
I mean,
by
that's
code?
one place. To be honest, I would prefer they provide the parking, okay? Because that's a big part of why we're having all these parking issues around town. So for every project, I think they should be fully parked. But if they are not going to be, if they cannot be for some reason, then we should be charging what is the going rate for the parking. Potentially on one of the projects, I think we're leaving about 680,000 on the table.
A current project?
There's a project that is at the corner of Hamilton and Webster. It's actually multi-residential residences.
It's becoming becoming single family, right? Is that the one? Or is multifamily becoming multifamily?
I don't remember exactly what it is, but I think there might be offices in there
Okay.
also. But it's on the corner of Webster. It's across from that tall church that's there. But they're low-rise, I think 1 or 2 story apartments,
Okay.
and they're very low density. And I think there were some low-income people that, I mean, the rents were pretty low that people could afford to live there. That's going to be, that there's a proposal to tear it down and to build something else. And there's parking in lieu that they're not fully parked. So on that project alone, based on what they're proposing, there's about 680,000 that could be left on the table. So that's a lot of money. So we have to kind of look at all of these projects too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things in this city.
It's a good reminder that expenses are just half of these 2 books, and
That's right.
revenues are the other.
Right,
So,
right.
no, it's
Yeah.
look forward to hearing that discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Well, Lydia Koo, thank you so much for joining us today and helping us to unpack the budget a little bit. And I appreciate your insight.
Brand new at this, so excuse me.
I appreciate it. It's
Thank
great.
you very
Yeah,
much.
thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
All right, well, that wraps us up for this week's edition of Behind the Headlines. You can always find news on paloaltoonline.com and talk about the news at paloaltoonline.com/square for Town Square, our community discussion forum. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you want to subscribe to this webcast, just go below and hit subscribe. We'll see you next week.